My mama told me a lot of things, but she didn't tell me the secret to life. That's because my mother didn't know until she was dying. And so today we're going to explore this idea. What is that secret? You know, it's something that everyone has been looking for all of their lives. If you even listen and watch Raiders of the Lost Ark, they were looking for what? The secret to life. The covenant of the lost ark. Then there was the Holy Grail. Everything is always about seeking something, and it's always about this quest, and we tend to be looking outside of ourselves for it. And yet when we come back to all the great mystics, Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, they all talked about it is within. Jesus said it so clearly, it is the Father within me, where all of the power, all of the joy, all of the love comes from. He says, it is through that connection that I have with the Father that I do this, and that you can do this and even more. So Jesus was this way sharer that came into our lives and gave us the demonstration. But instead of embracing this idea of being love, we created a fantasy story around this man and put him on a pedestal, and we worshiped him as separate from us. But you see, Jesus never said that. Jesus said, this I do and you can do and more. So we come back to the basic, the essence of what was this teaching? What were these commandments that are talking about love? And Jesus said it was to love God above all else and to love thy neighbor as thyself. And so we can go through life and we can have all of our life experiences. The question is it the experience we want? Each of us here is to experience life differently. There are no two people in this room that are desiring to have the same experience because there's no two people in the world that are like. So we've got to give up the idea that we're here to please someone else. We've got to give up the idea that we're here to do it the way someone else wants us to do it, the way society wants it, the way the government, the way our school system, the way our parents want it, the way our children want it. We have to give that up and say, what is it that my heart is desiring to experience? The little boy that I was at 7 years old brought up within me that I wanted to serve in the capacity of spirit. I wanted to be a teacher. And at 7, because of where I was raised, I thought it was to be a Catholic priest. And when that didn't prove to be my natural outpicturing, I gave up my dream. I gave up my dream for 47 years. And then I refound it as I studied spirituality. And today, I get to live the dream that was so alive at the age of 7 that I had hidden. So as we go through this talk, I ask, what is that dream in you? What is that inner calling that is coming forth? That's desiring to be expressed, that brings you that sense of connection and joy. What is it? So we're going to go back to the very essence of life. And one of the things that comes to me is that I've had many discussions with spiritual people around the world of different faiths, different practices. And I go back to an experience I had about 4 months ago when I was in the gym on the elliptical. And next to me on the elliptical was a minister from a local church right down the street from where I live. It's a very large church. And he found out that I was a minister, and he asked me what was my denomination. I said, I'm from the Agape Center for Spiritual Living. And he says, well, what is that? I says, I'm a religious scientist. I take the essence of spirituality, I take the philosophy of spirituality, and I prove it for myself. I test it, I prove it over and over again, and it is in the proving of it that I get my faith. And the greater my faith is, the greater I get to prove it at a higher and higher level. And he says, well, that's not what the Bible says. And he was going on with the Bible. And I said, I value everything that you're saying, and I see how it so clearly works for you and works for your community. I says, but you're not understanding. And he says, what am I not understanding? I said, the Bible is not my source. And he looked at me very puzzled. And he said, so what is your source? And I said, the fact that God is infinite, that God is omnipotent, omniscient, and everywhere present, everywhere present. God has always been, always will be. There is nothing but God. God is constantly expressing itself in and through and as all things. God is creating itself out of itself as us. God can be nothing other than infinite. There are no words for God. And so my leap of faith comes from the standpoint of knowing that God is infinite. Once I know that God is infinite, everything else flows from there. So when everything else flows from that one simple leap, which is the commonality of every spirituality, there is an infinite power and presence, but in our human mind, we make it to be that there is differences, there is separation, and there is not separation. So the secret of life comes in two forms. There's the A, and it's followed by the B. And here's the A. Our life experience is totally based on what we believe about God and our relationship to it. Do we believe that God is infinite? Do we really believe that? Or do we believe that we're separate from God? That's the question I have to ask. Because to really believe that God is infinite means that you cannot at any moment of any day have any feeling that you are separate from the divinity. You are separate from divine mind. You're separate from infinite love. You cannot be separate. You must be one with it because God in its allness only knows its perfection. In our human mind, we lose the capacity to recognize the truth of who we are at all times, and we go in and out of duality. We go in and out of contrast. We go in and out of this, that, and the other. But when we stay centered and we have this idea that we believe that God is all there is, then we understand that we are one with it. And in that oneness of it, we now have the ability to self-love. Because in the ability to self-love, we know our oneness. It is in that oneness now that we start to live. You see, are we one or are we separate? And that pertains to every aspect of life. When you go to the movie theater and you sit and you watch people come in, are you making a judgment about who's walking in, what they look like, who they're talking with, about that? Are you seeing the interconnection of all things? When you're at the airport, the greatest place in the world to people watch. The greatest way to see people interacting in frustration and joy, in every emotion is happening at the airport. Are you seeing separation? Or are you seeing oneness? Are you seeing the perfect balance of life happening? You see, in the allness, in that anthill we call an airport, because there's ants going every which way, doing whatever they're doing, right? Can you see that it's all in perfect rhythm? That it's part of the divine plan? And what is the divine plan? To create and express. We've just gotten rid of the myth that there's something particular that you're supposed to do. You're only supposed to create, express, and experience. There is nothing judging. See, there can't be something judging. To judge means there has to be something outside of you. And if God is outside of you and judging, then you're not an aspect of God. Therefore, the Father and I are one can't be true. Therefore, the infinite cannot be true about God. So we've got to get over the myth, the stories that have been told throughout humanity for thousands of years that we are separate and embrace the oneness. And when we embrace the oneness, we now embrace 100% perfect responsibility and total responsibility for our lives. That nothing happens in our life that we are not responsible for. That's a tough one. Because it takes time to sit back and say, why? How did I cause that? Well, most of the time it was an unconsciousness that caused it in our thoughts. So we've got this idea that our life experience is based on what we believe about God and our relationship to it, meaning we are one with it. We're always there. It is always with us, and it is personal to us. God is very personal to us in that it will express by creating an experience what we're thinking about, the sum total of all of our thoughts, the conscious and the unconscious combined together. So that is the secret of life, part A. What is part B? It's knowing that our life is the experience and is totally based on what we believe about God and our relationship to it, and our subsequent and persistent chosen or unchosen pattern of thinking. Do you notice I said chosen and unchosen? Because most of our thought, 95 to 99% of our thought, is unchosen. It is a habit. It's a habit that's been built through thousands of years that have been inherited down into mankind, into humankind, into womankind. We have this in our DNA. It's an energy, it's an energetic, it's an awareness that radiates through everything. But in every moment, we have the ability to break that unconscious habit, and we have the ability of conscious thought, which can shift our experience the moment we start feeding that into our desire, into the way that we are. You see, it's a pattern of thought. It's not an individual thought. This is really a critical aspect of this whole creative process. Most of the time we think, well, I'm going to do a prayer. And I know that I'm abundant and $1 million is going to come into me. And the next minute we're saying, I got all these bills and I don't know how I'm going to pay them. I've got this happen to me. I don't know how I'm going to deal with that. In that simple example, what was the pattern of thought? It was a pattern of lack. There was one statement about abundance, and then there was a whole series about what was not present. And what does the God aspect, the aspect of God that creates here? It takes in the sum total, the totality of thought, and that becomes our experience. So as we begin a habit of thinking that's different, the more we build that habit, that pattern of thought, then this demonstration starts to unfold itself. Does that make sense? You see, it's not that you're going to get an instantaneous demonstration. It's going to be an unfolding because your thoughts are unfolding. If you could shift your thought in a moment, if I could shift my thought in a moment and say, I'm 25 years old. If I could believe that in this moment, my body would transform itself. I don't believe that. Can my body function at the level of a 25-year-old? Yes. I believe that. Do I believe that my body can function like a healthy 27-year-old Ironman triathlete? No. My son believes it because he did it yesterday. I looked at it and I said, I don't want to believe in that. That's a lot of work. And you see, the aspect of it being a lot of work meant it is not in my dreamscape. It is not something I choose to have in my experience. So I was not willing to invest the mental, the spiritual, and the physical coin into creating that experience. So as I joked with Matthew on the phone, he says, Dad, you're just never going to compete with me. I'm an Ironman triathlete. I can do this. And I says, but when I go to India in 3 weeks, and I sit in an ashram in silent meditation for 16 days, I'm a spiritual Iron Man. Can you do that? And it's not that we're competing, but yes, we are. There's no such thing as Wolaks not competing. That's just something I'm just going to put out there. We are eternally doing this, that to each other. It's just part of our life. And we do it out of joy. We get great fun out of bantering back and forth because it's pushing each of us to become a greater expression, a greater experience. You see, it's always about one thing. In my world, and what I understand for you and for everyone that I meet is, the more we understand our relationship to God, the deeper that becomes, the greater the love, the joy, the peace, the abundance, the health experience we have. And let me put it to you really clearly, that level of joy cannot be limited. So if you have studied Tantra, and you are at the ultimate state there is more. There's always more, because remember, the essence of God is what? It is infinite, meaning it is always becoming more. That's why when they're describing the cosmos is expanding as we speak, faster and bigger than we've ever dreamed. That's the infinite experience in expressing itself. So if that's the infinite and that's the macrocosm and we're the microcosm of that, then we must be expanding. But we're only expanding based on our choice. And what happens is that when we stop this glorious and grand expansion into our dreams, our lives become very unpleasant for us. Because we're not in vibration with that which we are. You see, when we are growing, when we're becoming more, there's a vibration that we put out to the universe. And when we're locked into that vibration, there's this feeling of good that resonates through, in and as us. But when we are going away from what we desire, we feel like crap. We don't feel good and things go wrong for us because we're not tapped in, tuned in, and turned on to the infinite nature of God and our relationship to it. The question I want to ask you, what patterns of thought are in your life today that are no longer serving you? What in your life is not where you want it? And is there a thought pattern behind it? It's not, is there a thought pattern behind it? There is a thought pattern behind it. The question is, can you identify the thought pattern? And now you switch to the other end of the spectrum and build a new thought pattern. You see, remember, it is the subsequent and persistently chosen pattern of thinking, or we can leave it at the unchosen. But I don't think you're here to leave things to the unchosen. I think you're here because you're saying there's more to this life, there's more that I desire, and I want to know how to do that, so I want the tools that I can use to shift my life, which means you want to choose patterns of thought in alignment with yourself, perceiving your relationship to the divine, your oneness with the divine, so now you become a creator, a conscious creator, and the world sits back and watches the magnificence of God as you. The magnificence of God as you. Many people don't like when I say that because I am violating race consciousness. How can you put yourself in the same essence as God? The question is, how can I not? If God is infinite and I'm the child of God, then I am equal to God. My sons in every way are equal to me. My wife is equal to me. There is no difference other than the way we think. That is the only difference between anyone, is the way we are using our mind, the way we are using our subsequent and persistent chosen or unchosen thought. That is the only difference, and it is in that experience difference for everyone. So when we come to embody that, we can see that everyone is producing their perfect life. Life is perfect in this moment. Why? Because the law that is the essential creative nature of the divine is creating perfectly based on the thoughts we have put into it. So we don't have to say it's imperfect. The world right now, with all of the talk out there going on about the Associated Press having to turn their things over, the addresses over, and then Benghazi and Syria and all of this. Remember, that's a race-conscious thought. You can shift the thought. And you can shift to see the world in peace. And you can shift the thought to see the world perfectly outpicturing itself. And as you shift your energy, what you hear, what you see, and what you experience will shift in your experience. It has to. It's law. But when you buy into what's being put out there, you're sort of stuck into what? The law of averages. You will have an average life. The question I want to ask is, are you willing to live an average life? Are you willing to have do you know what the average mortality of a doctor is? I think it's gone up. It's now 59 years of age. The average mortality of a doctor, an MD, is 59 years of age. And I'm not saying that the medical profession has anything wrong with it. There's great things that happen from the medical profession. But who are you going to listen to? A 59-year-old or someone who's living into their hundreds that's got words of wisdom? The question is, you've got to make those decisions for yourself. You've got to decide, what do I believe? If you believe, my father believes in doctors. He lives at the doctor's offices. He lives there. It gives him great joy, and he's having the experience of living at a doctor's office with all the associated drugs and their counter effects. I choose to never go to a doctor. I've gone to a doctor 4 times, and all of them for necessary surgeries that I couldn't heal myself. Tonsils, I couldn't do a vasectomy on myself, and 2 hernias. Other than that, I mentally understand that an illness is a result of a cause within the mind. And if we shift the cause within our mind, we shift the experience of our body. You see, you can put and have a temporary relief in the body through drugs and surgery. It's a temporary relief. But what caused the illness in the first place is mental. It is a consistent and persistent thought process, unconscious, that we've had over our lives. And when we recognize our oneness with God, our relationship to God, and we shift the pattern of thought, we then shift the demonstration in our physical body. We call this practice of religious science a healing science because we're healing ourselves mentally, emotionally, and physically. Because if you practice this, there is nothing you cannot heal. There is nothing you cannot experience. The question is, when you dream, are you dreaming with this as your background? When you choose your dream, are you dreaming with this as your background? When you decide to speak to others, are you choosing this before you speak your words? As you think, are you choosing this before you think? When you act, are you acting from a basis ground in here? When you expect, are you expecting from this aspect? And when you receive, do you immediately begin the creative process again from this aspect? You see, this is what we're doing. It's a cycle of life. It's a cycle of creation. We will always be creating. We will never stop creating. And in that, we must have this as our basis. With this as our basis, everything is possible. Without this as our basis, we're destined to live a life that is average. I don't know about you, but average bores me. If I was living the average life of a minister, I would have already burned out. I wouldn't be a minister today because the average minister burns out in less than 5 years. Burns out. Now think about that. Can you imagine me burning out? I got more energy today than I did at 25. Why? Because I'm living my dream, and I'm living it in a connection with God and my relationship to God, and I'm altering my pattern of thought to be directive, to be creative. And when I'm becoming more, there is no burnout. There is no lack of energy. Energy is natural because divine wants to express, and divine energy is eternal. You see, you cannot destroy energy. Energy is impossible. It changes shape and form. But you see, you get to decide the form and the shape and the experience of it. So when you leave today, I'm going to ask you to contemplate this. What is God? What is my relationship to God? And what are the patterns of thought that I have in my life? And what would I like my chosen patterns of thought to be? My prayer this morning, as I was upstairs preparing for this talk, was that each person in this room that came to Agape today would be so tapped into divine wisdom that when they leave here after hearing this message, they will receive a clarity that will shift their life experience forever. So I've said that. Therefore, it must be so. Because my word, knowing the infinite power that I am, is taken into the mind of God, and it must be so. I want to thank you for joining us today. I am so grateful that you took your time to watch or listen to this message. If you found this message beneficial, I would ask you to go to our website. Once there, click on the Contribute button and experience the joy of conscious and purposeful giving. It is through your gifts that we are able to bring this message to the world. I would also ask you to please share this message with anyone you feel might benefit. Again, I want to thank you for joining me and the Agape community as together we bring joy to life.